It begins at number 10, a basement experiment at Stanford that spiraled into psychological abuse in just 6 days. In the 10th place, the Stanford prison experiment stands as a chilling lesson in the dangers of unchecked authority. In August 1971, 24 male students were randomly assigned as guards or prisoners in a simulated prison beneath Stanford's psychology building. Within days, guards, emboldened by vague instructions to maintain order, escalated from routine supervision to psychological abuse, forcing prisoners to endure humiliating tasks and solitary confinement. Archival footage captures the rapid breakdown, participants weeping, pleading for release, and showing signs of severe emotional distress. The study, intended to last 2 weeks, was halted after just 6 days, following a confrontation in which a graduate student declared that they were not a scientist but a prison warden and that the situation was insane. Zimbardo later admitted that situational forces can overwhelm individual morality. The American Psychological Association's review condemned the experiment's lack of safeguards, prompting reforms in research ethics and informed consent. Even with initial consent, the experiment's legacy remains a warning about the thin line between simulation and real harm. Number 9. The Milgram obedience experiments at Yale exposed the unsettling power of authority over conscience. Between 1961 and 1963, 40 men took part in what they believed was a study on learning and memory. Each was instructed to deliver electric shocks, rising in 15-volt increments, whenever a supposed learner made mistakes. The shock generator was marked from 15 to 450 volts, and though it was fake, the stress on participants was real. The experimenter calmly insisted that the experiment requires that you continue. Most participants showed visible anxiety, sweating, trembling, even pleading to stop. Yet 65% pressed the final 450-volt switch, believing they might be causing severe pain. Original audio captures a participant's voice shaking as he says, "I'm going to continue." That moment has become emblematic of obedience under pressure. Milgram's own notes and participant letters reveal lingering guilt and self-doubt. The study's profound legacy forced a reckoning with deception in research, and it helped shape modern standards for informed consent. In 8th place, the Willowbrook hepatitis studies reveal the exploitation of some of society's most vulnerable. From 1956 to 1970, doctors at Willowbrook State School in New York deliberately infected nearly 5,000 institutionalized children with hepatitis, most of whom had intellectual disabilities. 90% of those studied contracted the virus, and at least 15 children died as a result. Parents were often told that enrollment in the study would secure better living conditions for their children, but consent was obtained under the pressure of overcrowded, unsanitary wards. State reports and survivor testimony describe feelings of betrayal and fear, as children were injected without true understanding or choice. Legal action years later led to a $7 million settlement for survivors. But the case stands as a stark warning about the dangers of coercion and the ethical failures that can arise when vulnerable people are treated as subjects rather than as human beings. Number 7. Forced sterilization and eugenics programs in the United States reveal a chilling chapter in policy-driven human rights abuse. Beginning in 1907 with Indiana's sterilization law, more than 30 states enacted statutes that targeted people labeled unfit, often the poor, the disabled, or people of color. The 1927 Supreme Court case Buck v. Bell set a fateful precedent, with Justice Holmes declaring, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough." This ruling paved the way for roughly 65,000 forced sterilizations, many performed without true consent. Survivor testimonies, like Irene White's account of being told at 19 she would never have children, capture the lifelong trauma these laws inflicted. In recent decades, states such as California have issued formal apologies and compensation to victims. The legacy of these programs stands as a warning about how pseudoscience and prejudice, when codified into law, can strip entire communities of their most basic rights. Number 6. The CIA's MK-Ultra program and its offshoot Operation Midnight Climax reveal the extremes of Cold War secrecy in the pursuit of mind control. From 1953 to 1973, the CIA funded a network of covert projects across the United States, dosing around 8,000 unwitting individuals with LSD, mescaline, and other psychoactive substances. Safe houses in San Francisco and New York became sites where agents observed subjects through one-way mirrors, often without their knowledge or consent. Declassified CIA memos and testimony before the Senate Church Committee show that at least 12% of those exposed suffered psychiatric breakdowns, and 5 deaths, officially ruled as suicides, were linked to the experiments. Lawsuits filed by survivors like Frank Bennett forced the agency to release thousands of redacted documents, revealing a pattern of deliberate deception and psychological harm. The program's exposure in the 1970s led to a public reckoning over secret government science and new legal protections for human research subjects. Number 5. The Cold War. Human radiation experiments reveal the deep costs of state secrecy in the pursuit of scientific and military dominance. From 1945 to 1974, federal agencies including the Atomic Energy Commission and the Department of Defense oversaw a series of studies that exposed around 7,000 Americans to ionizing radiation, often without their knowledge or consent. Subjects included hospital patients, pregnant women, infants, and military personnel. In one notorious case, terminally ill patients were injected with plutonium at hospitals like Oak Ridge and Los Alamos with no therapeutic intent. Dose-response data later linked these exposures to approximately 1,200 excess cancers and 300 birth defects. Survivor accounts, such as Ethel Miller's testimony of being injected while pregnant, document years of illness and unanswered questions. The 1994 Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments report forced open decades of classified files, prompting a formal apology from President Clinton and the creation of a $10 million compensation fund under the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. These experiments, once justified as national security imperatives, left a legacy of suffering and catalyzed new protections for research subjects. Tuskegee's syphilis study stands as a defining case of institutional betrayal and medical racism in American history. Beginning in 1932, the United States Public Health Service recruited 399 black men in Alabama, promising free medical care, but secretly observing the natural course of untreated syphilis. Even after penicillin became the standard cure in the 1940s, officials withheld treatment, documenting the progression of disease as men suffered blindness, paralysis, and death. More than 100 participants died, and at least 25 children were born with congenital syphilis. Internal CDC memos later released under the Freedom of Information Act reveal a deliberate policy of non-intervention, with explicit instructions that the men must not be treated appearing in official correspondence. Survivor voices like Moses Stewart's recorded testimony capture the sense of betrayal and loss. Public outrage after the study's exposure in 1972 led to a class action lawsuit, a $10 million settlement, and in 1997, a formal apology from President Clinton. The legacy of Tuskegee drove the creation of institutional review boards, setting new standards for informed consent and oversight in human research. Number 3. The Guatemala syphilis experiments expose how ethical boundaries were shattered on foreign soil. Between 1946 and 1948, U.S. Public Health Service researchers, backed by the State Department and the Army, deliberately infected around 5,000 Guatemalan men and women with syphilis, gonorrhea, and chancroid. Targets included prisoners, psychiatric patients, soldiers, and sex workers, most with no possibility of informed consent. Infection protocols, revealed decades later in declassified state cables and Public Health Service field reports, involved direct inoculation and even forced sexual contact. At least 200 participants died from complications, while many others suffered lifelong neurological damage. Survivor accounts, such as Carlos Lopez's Senate testimony, describe a climate of fear and confusion, with victims often unaware they had been made subjects. For decades, the experiments remained hidden, shielded by classified files and bureaucratic denials. It was not until 2010, after a commission report and mounting pressure from human rights advocates, that the U.S. government formally acknowledged the abuse. President Obama offered a public apology that recognized the grave injustice, but no reparations were paid. The legacy of Guatemala's infection trials stands as a stark warning. When science is wielded without oversight or respect for human dignity, the harm can cross borders and echo for generations. Number 2. Unit 731 Ulsan operated as the nerve center of Japan's biological warfare program in occupied Manchuria from 1933 to 1945. Behind the concrete walls of its Harbin facility, military doctors and scientists, led by Shiro Ishii, orchestrated mass experiments on prisoners and civilians. Operational logs and Khabarovsk trial transcripts detail a catalog of horrors. At least 3,000 people were subjected to vivisection, many without anesthesia, and thousands more were exposed to plague, anthrax, and cholera as part of field tests. Mortality estimates range from 200,000 to 300,000, with entire villages targeted for infection to test the spread of weaponized disease. Survivors like Jiang Wei, who endured a failed plague vaccine trial, later described the terror and confusion that swept through rural communities. After Japan's surrender, the Soviet Union prosecuted 12 Unit 731 officers, but the United States struck a secret deal, granting immunity from war crimes in exchange for data on biological weapons. No formal reparations have ever been paid, and the full extent of the program's atrocities remains the subject of ongoing debate in Chinese and Russian archives. The scale, intent, and secrecy of Unit 731's operations place it among the darkest chapters in the history of human experimentation, second only to the Nazi medical crimes that would follow. And finally, in first place, the Nazi concentration camp experiments define the darkest threshold of human experimentation. Between 1939 and 1945, SS physicians and scientists conducted a systematic campaign of medical torture across occupied Europe, targeting Jews, Roma, and other prisoners in camps like Auschwitz, Ravensbrück, and Buchenwald. Archival photographs from Block 10 at Auschwitz show the brutal reality: sterilizations, high-altitude chamber tests, forced hypothermia, and twin studies. Records from the Nuremberg doctors' trial document over 200,000 subjects, with mortality rates among some experiment groups reaching as high as 16%. Survivor testimony, such as Ilse Klein's account of forced sterilization, reveals the personal cost behind the statistics. Ilse Klein recalled that she was given an injection and told it was for her health. The pain was unbearable. Later, she found out she could never have children. The Nuremberg Tribunal delivered 7 death sentences and 13 life imprisonments, but its most enduring legacy was the creation of the Nuremberg Code, a 10-point statement that established informed consent as a cornerstone of research ethics. This legal watershed reshaped international law, setting standards that are still referenced in human rights debates today. In the decades since, the German government has paid more than $10 million in reparations, and professional medical associations have issued formal apologies. The sheer scale, intent, and institutionalization of harm in these experiments mark an ethical collapse that continues to serve as a warning. The principles forged in the aftermath remain a foundation for modern protections against the abuse of scientific power. Across all 10 cases, one pattern stands out. Unchecked authority and dehumanization allow science to become a tool for harm. These experiments aren't relics, they are warnings. Ethical safeguards exist for a reason. Our vigilance determines whether progress serves humanity or betrays it. Thanks for watching, and stay curious.